Hello. So this is going to be a quick tutorial slash walkthrough of how to create this pitch chord grid in TouchDesigner and Ableton. And you can download the files from my Patreon for free. Link will be in the description. And you can open the project and follow along. And here's a quick showcase of what it does. So before we start with the actual showcase, for people who are not familiar with TouchDesigner and Ableton, there's a couple of things that you need to know about connection between both software, which is TD Ableton package. So if you haven't used this before, you need to add this from your palette here. You will find it under TD Ableton and then Live 11 Plus, or if you have 9 or 10, then you choose that. And then what you need is this TD Ableton package. Once you have that, you need to make sure that TD Ableton is installed. TouchDesigner just walks you through it and you can just install it. And then the next step in the setup is actually enabling the MIDI remote scripts in Ableton. So if you go to your settings, under link, tempo, and MIDI, in control surfaces, you should add TouchDesigner in one of them. So you'll probably have none, and then you just go and search for TouchDesigner and add it there. If you're going to start a project from scratch, then you should make sure that on the main track, you have a TDA master. And if you downloaded the project files from Patreon, then you should see connected here. And that's a sign that both software are connected over OSC and they should work. If you're just doing the setup for the first time, maybe restarting TouchDesigner and Ableton would help if they're not connecting. So let's start with the setup for Ableton. Here I just have this track, which is called mouse, because we're controlling it with our mouse, and is just basically one synth duplicated 4 times. So I'll just solo one of them so you can hear it. And I put them into 2 chains, each one of them having 2 different notes. That's why we have 4. You can also do this over 4 MIDI channels, but I just like having them in a rack. So the next important device that's making all of this possible is CC Control. And it's basically just controlling the pitch bend for each of these voices. And the pitch bend for each 2 voices is controlled by this XY pad. And you can see that as I move it, the pitch bend for each note is changing. So for this note, it's the Y-axis that changes the pitch. And for this note, it's the X-axis. All of this is basically duplicated here. So we have 4 voices. Each voice is controlled by 1 dot. So now we can jump into TouchDesigner to check the setup here. So the first thing I made was this grid, and it's just a set of vertical lines and horizontal lines and the text. So you can see that these are just lines. The next element is actually the 2 dots. So you can see here that we have a red, purple dot and a blue one. And the way we're controlling them is that left mouse click controls the position of the red dot, and right mouse click controls the position of the blue dot. The setup for this was a little bit more complicated. So here you can see that we have the dots. So this is the red one. And it's controlled here with the mouse position. So you can see this is the chop for the mouse position that is tracking the X-axis and the Y-axis. And here I needed quite a bit of chopping to actually control this to go exactly from this point to this point, and that to be an octave. This circle goes through this little chop network that I got from the forum. And what it basically does is that it tracks the position of the dots. So it just takes the color. So I did select the color here in this top, and it just tracks it. And you might think this is probably a stupid idea to track the position and then send it to Ableton. But what this allows is that now you don't need to actually use the mouse data. You can just use any picture that has dots with these colors. So for example, if you like a chord and you don't want to record it in Ableton, you can just take a screenshot of this thing here, of course, without all the network, and then just input it into TouchDesigner, and then you will get the same chord again. All of this is done again here a second time for the blue dot. And there's also an interesting part of the chop network that is actually not allowing the circle to move unless I click. So you can see here that only if I click and move, the dot moves. But if I just move my mouse, the dot doesn't move. After all of this, all of these parameters are going to this TD Ableton parameter, and these are being sent to the XY pad that we've seen in Ableton that controls the pitch bend. Another pretty useful thing is this keyboard in. And what it does is basically we have 4 voices. 1 and 2 are the voices for the red dot, and 3 and 4 are the voices for the blue one. And if you press 1, 2, 3, or 4 on your keyboard, you can disable or enable any of these voices. So here's a quick example. And this is basically most of the stuff that you need to know to be able to create something like this. And actually the inspiration for this was a short by 3 Blue 1 Brown, where he tries to find the mathematical equation to describe any 2-note set, or basically in music terms, a musical interval. And actually, if you really think about it, you don't need a full grid for this. You actually just need half of the grid diagonally, because the other half diagonally would be just repetition. But I still think that this offers a better visualization for harmony that you can use. And now for the most important part is how can you actually play with this and record chords out of it. So first, after you start the Ableton session and the TouchDesigner session, so let's start with Ableton on this one. You need to have this track soloed here, so you only hear this one, or you can just delete these because you don't need them for now. And here, you're just gonna play. And if all the voices are turned on correctly in TouchDesigner, so you have here 1, 2, 3, 4, then you should hear 4 voices in Ableton, which is the case. And of course, as always, you need to check here that TDA master is connected, because otherwise it's not going to get the pitch data from TouchDesigner. And now in TouchDesigner, what you need to do is you go to this window 2, which is the biggest node you can see here. You press on it and you open as perform window. And then here you only get the interactive part of the patch without the network, but it should all be working correctly with all the keyboard numbers and with the mouse clicks. So left mouse click for red dot and right mouse click for the blue dot. There's a slight problem here that might be different for each monitor that you're using, which is that this window setup is tracking the objective mouse position. So you can see that now the dot actually tracks my mouse, like very close to my mouse. But if I move the window, then the dot is going to be somewhere else. So you can see that the dot is now further away, and if I move it down, then it's also going to be further down. So you need to kind of find the spot. For me, it's always in the right spot because I made it on this monitor, but I can imagine that different monitor setups are going to have different positions. So this looks correct now. And if you start playing in Ableton, then this should also work. Nice. And let's say you find chords that you like and you want to record them in Ableton. So you need to have your MIDI note. So I'm just going to delete everything here. And let's copy this one here. And we want to record the chord here. First, you need to make sure that the plus icon is on, which enables recording without overriding the MIDI. And you need to make sure that the automation record is also enabled. And of course, you need to arm the track and then hit record. And now we're gonna change the chord in TouchDesigner. And now if you look at your Ableton session, you should see the automations for all the tracks that we have changed. So you can right click here and then add lane for each automated envelope. And then you'll see the automations for each node that you did. And if we listen back from here, for example, we should hear it exactly as we played it.